Well, we know that a bunch of people are still going to be joining, but we want to go ahead and, in the interest of time, welcome you to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Katie Kaur. I'm the president and CEO of the Nashville Public Education Foundation, and we are really looking forward to a conversation today about our English learner population in MNPS. Who are our English learner students? How do they experience our schools? What are their families encountering in our community? And what can we, at the end of the day, do to help support our EL students? We want to have a conversation with some wonderful panelists who, again, I'll introduce shortly. But also we want to attempt to dispel some myths about our EL student population in the city of Nashville. And so we're going to start off in just a few minutes with some basic facts about our EL students and the communities in which they live. I want to add that we had a wonderful panelist who was going to join us from the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, but unfortunately she is not feeling well tonight, so she will not be joining us. But we have a wonderful panel in her stead, and we're very much looking forward to hearing from them. With that, I think we will go ahead and get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things. You'll note in the bottom there of your screen, if you're used to Zoom, you know the chat feature and the Q&A feature, which is what we will be using today for questions that you might have. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the panelist discussion, and then we will have a Q&A period at the end of the panel conversation to respond to your questions, or you can pose questions at that time. You can also raise your hand through Zoom if you are interested in doing that, and we will take your questions. So first, we will have a quick overview of some of our facts about our EL students in Nashville, and then I'll introduce our wonderful panelists. So. We really wanted to kind of give a sense of what Nashville has experienced in the last couple of decades. And as most of you on this call know, we have had an explosion in our foreign-born population and a significant increase in the number of community members who are foreign-born in the city of Nashville. In fact, 86% over the last, in the first decade or so of the 2000s. Roughly 12% of our entire community in Nashville are foreign-born, and so we're going to talk a little bit about breaking that out and want really to reinforce that the English language student population is not a monolith, and we have a variety, as you will see shortly, of different nationalities and languages spoken in our schools and in our community. So, of that, the shocking number when I first worked in the district that I was so amazed by, 140 different languages are spoken on any given day in Metro Nashville Public Schools, stemming from 130 different countries around the world. You'll see here, obviously, Spanish, as would be no surprise, is our most prominent language outside of English in the city, followed by Arabic, Kurdish, Somali, Burmese, Swahili, Vietnamese, Amharic, Nepali, and Chinese. And I bring this up just to highlight, first of all, that it's amazing that we have such an unbelievably diverse community with this many, 140 different languages, but also that we have significant populations in 10 languages and probably even more like 12 to 14 languages in the community, where the district provides resources, supports, and communication across all 10 of these languages on a regular basis. It's a really amazing thing that we see happening in the district all the time, and it's really incredible to be part of the interpreters' conversations with our families in so many different languages. We also wanted to make sure that we dispelled the idea that all of our EL students are Hispanic. We hear that a lot in our world in education, and though we do have a lot of Hispanic students in our community, we also have a lot of EL students who identify with different racial and ethnic backgrounds, including many white and Black African American ethnicities. And so with that, you know, we have over here on the left-hand side, you'll see 26% of the district is Hispanic. but 16% are English learners. So just, I feel silly having to state the obvious, but not all of our Hispanic students are EL students, and not all of our EL students are Hispanic families either. So we are home to 31% of the state's entire English learning population. And then we also just wanted to reflect on the fact that though we do have a significant increase over the last couple of decades in the number of foreign-born community members, 66% of our EL students are actually born in the United States. So a little bit about the wonderful EduSpeak that is EL language. We talk about English learners. You might have heard the term ELS or English ESL, English as a second language, which is a little bit outdated now. There's also limited English proficiency, which is a broader term that encompasses both active students who are in our EL programming in MNPS, as well as transitional students, those students who've graduated out of our EL programming, but are still learning English to some degree. So of the 21,000 students in MNPS, roughly a quarter of all of our students, about 16,000 of those are actively enrolled in our EL programming, which you'll hear about obviously from our panelists shortly. Another 5,000 or so are actually in this transitional EL status. We also wanted to give a little bit of information about when we, see the introduction of most of our EL students in MNPS. The majority, would not be a huge surprise, actually do come to us in the early years, in the elementary school years. But we still have EL students joining the district at all levels, in middle and high school. And in fact, we graduate several hundred students each year who are still in EL status from the district, but have obviously met benchmarks for graduation. The majority of our EL population is, not the majority, but a significant portion of our EL population is in the southeast quadrant of Davidson County. Roughly 1/3 of all students in the southeast quadrant are English learners. And so that quadrant is made up of the 3 high school clusters of Antioch High School, Cane Ridge High School, and Glencliff High School. And you can see their percentages of EL students on the graph here. You'll also see Overton High School, which I think I saw our wonderful principal from Overton High School on the line, Jill Pittman. Her school has the next highest level behind Glencliff at 30% of EL students in the building. When we start talking about the effect of COVID-19 on our EL families, we definitely need to look at the zip codes that COVID had the greatest effect on. And of course, you'll see on this heat map here that the southeast quadrant outside of the core of the downtown area in Nashville really experienced a disproportionate effect of COVID-19 in our community. There are a lot of reasons for this. We are assuming the ones that I've listed here. We have a high essential worker population in the southeast quadrant. We have a lack of trust with health officials and with government in general in some cases. And then of course, just general language barriers about providing information in an accessible way to families so that they could understand the risks of COVID-19. There have been a lot of work that has been done to mitigate against this. And again, you'll hear about some of that on our call today. Finally, we wanted to just show that the majority of our students, the vast majority, actually 3/4 roughly of our students, show significant growth in English language attainment each year. And that almost half of our students achieved English language proficiency, and these are from a couple of years ago because of our testing gaps in the state process. But I just wanted to reiterate that our students are making significant progress and are coming to us in many cases having not learned any English in their home countries, and are just doing, our community and our city and our schools are just doing some amazing work to help get them affiliated with the English language, but then also learning and growing in our community. And then finally, we really felt the need to highlight and recognize that there's some amazing contributions that our EL families have provided to the district and to the city, and not least of which some of our most outstanding students. In 2019, we had 11 students who had exited English learner services in our schools, who were either valedictorians or salutatorians in their respective high schools. That's just an amazing contribution to our community. That we also are seeing that similar statistic in our 2020 data. And so just to recognize what a amazing contribution we have with our EL families, again, which we will explore in much more detail with our fabulous panel. So with that, I'm going to introduce our three panelists today. We have Maria Paula Zapata, who is the Associate Director of Education Programs at Conexión Americas, Molly Hegwood, who is the Executive Director of in the Office of English Learners at Metro Schools, and then Samuel Montoya, who is the Youth Development Specialist at Conexión as well. I am going to ask each of them to just introduce themselves a little bit and tell us a little bit about your role and maybe a little bit about your story about how you got involved in working with English learners. Maria, let's start with you.
Sure. So I work at Conexión Americas along with Samuel, and my role is actually to support him and his 8 other amazing colleagues, making sure that our 6 programs that we put on, which are all supporting English language learners, are of the highest quality and as responsive as possible to our students. And so I think my role is really thinking about how is the structure of programming at Conexión and the ways that we're working with families and students as responsive as possible to the needs of students, and then just not just within Conexión Americas program, but then how do we take that expertise and those lessons and share them with school system organizations, partner organizations that might be able to benefit from some of our expertise. I am deeply passionate about English learners and Latino students as a whole, as I was an English learner. So I got to the US when I was 7 years old and started in my own EL classroom, and here I am now. So I think when I see our EL students, I see future teachers, future leaders, future educators.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria. Molly.
Well, I'm Molly Hegwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of English Learners from Metro Nashville Public Schools.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Molly. You want to?
Well, sometimes my audio on my computer. Is it better now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna have to lean in.
We understand the world of Zoom. Everybody sure does.
I have the opportunity and really the pleasure of supporting EL students as they start in the MNPS school system all the way through their high school graduation. So kind of my role includes working with registration of English learners, supporting teachers and principals in their schools, EL family programming in conjunction with the support services department, and just also ensuring that those services that they are required to receive every day are implemented. Another important part of my job is to help and collaborate with other central office departments to ensure that English learners are at the forefront of their planning and that we're meeting the needs of English learners in all the departments in MNPS. I also have the pleasure of, and I'm continuing to just learn more and more from our community partners so that we can utilize their expertise and bring that expertise to teachers and leaders in our department, and also connect families with the resources that they offer.
That's great. Thank you, Molly. Samuel, tell us about your story and how you support English learners' success in our community.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Samuel Montoya. I'm the Youth Development Specialist at Conexión Americas that is housed at Overton High School. And the way I support students is I'm the first point of contact for newly arrivals that are coming into Overton High School. And I basically become everything that they need me to be to support them in any sort of situation possible. So I support with behavior, attendance, and academics with that specific group. And I also just provide social emotional support to those that are, those students that are experiencing being in the school for the first time in the US. And I basically just kind of walk them through what the process is, and like the experiences of what being in school is in the U.S. And become everything they need me to be, basically. I also just do a lot of other support for other students that I kind of find and at school, and just to provide help them with college access, with academic support, and a bunch of other things. So that's what I do.
That's great. Thank you so much, Samuel. Before we get into some of the questions that we sent all of our panelists ahead of time, I'm going to throw them a little curveball here. So was there anything that I shared in those first slides that was something that you would like to respond to or share some thoughts about? Because I know we had conversations with each of you about some of the misperceptions, the myths that are pervasive in the nation about our EL population. So anything you want to touch on there before we get into some specific questions for each of you?
I'd be happy to start this one if you'd like. So one of the pieces that I always really like to highlight, and I love that you also pulled that out, is that the majority of our students, I'm having to lean in. I don't know why my microphone is not working well, but
we understand.
The majority of our students are born here in the United States. And that's often a common misconception that all of our students are not born here. And that is an important thing that teachers need to understand, and support staff, so they can better support our families.
That's great. Any ahas, Maria or Samuel?
Well, yeah, I'm just like super in awe of like the specific area where our population is located in the southeast part of the city, and it just blows my mind the amount of students that we have in that area, and how like much support it's required specifically in that area, and how much like so much work that needs to happen in there. It's just like, it kind of blows my mind of how much effort goes into that, but like how much need also there is in the southeast part of the city.
Yeah. Although to build on that, I know we can't spend too long on this, but
okay.
We have tons of resources in the southeast, and often our families in the other parts of the quadrants don't have as much access. So that's been something that we've been really thinking about, is how can we provide these opportunities for if you live in Madison and other areas.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great point. Well, I'm going to ask my first question to Molly and Samuel, which is, what types of supports help EL students become successful in our schools? Give us a little bit more of a sense of what that means and looks like for students. Molly, you want to start?
Sure, because I think what I will say will then kick off Samuel's part, because he is the one that does a lot of these things. But so the most important thing I think a person needs to remember for an English learner is that they have to feel comfortable in a setting in order to practice the language and really excel academically. So the first thing that teachers need to do and staff need to do is to build those positive relationships with students and their families. And really spend that time to get to know the student. Understand the strengths that the student has. They may not speak English yet, but there are other pieces that they are really excelling in. And so really dig into those so you can make those connections. So it's beyond language, it's academics, it's other talents that they might have in order for that teacher-student connection to happen. One thing I always think of next is, after you really get to know your student, you have to take a deeper look into the language level of a student. Like you said already, our English learners are multifaceted. There's many different levels, right? So what does that overall level look like? And what does that really mean, and how it plays out in academic settings? And then really digging into how those two come together. How can we bring in that language background, culture, and other things about the family in order to help the student feel more comfortable? I always remind people to think about what you would feel like if you were brand new in a school, brand new in a country, and you didn't speak the language. You probably would not be talking a lot in that first day, or that first week, or that first month. So remember that and try to bring that student in through the things that you learn about the student. And those relationships will help foster and bring down that student's anxiety in order for them to really dig in there. And that's really honestly what Samuel does such a great job with at Overton. So I'll kick it to you.
Well, I feel like you already answered the entire question in that. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Molly. The fact that these students, you have to dig into like their learning abilities. You also need to create an environment which is safe for a lot of our students to learn. I deal with a lot of students who deal with have experienced a lot of trauma. And one of the things that is important for them is to feel comfortable, because if they don't feel comfortable in the learning environment, they will not be able to learn. And I know that a lot of the teachers have a lot of expectations about what the students need to do, and they can do them. But if you create an environment when it's safe for the student to feel comfortable, then like you are giving such a great tool for that student to succeed. One of the first things that I like to do is just to be present and in the moment with them when they come for the first time into our school, because that just gives them a little bit of more, a little bit of happiness. They feel more calm, more relaxed. You know, that safe environment where you can connect with someone who speaks the language, to someone that understands their culture, their background. And I know that can be difficult sometimes because we have so many teachers that might not be from the same background or culture. But I feel like if the teachers create that safe environment for the students, then like those EL students will succeed in everything that you throw them at. And so I think that's one of the big supports that you need to create. Just that being present in the moment, being just be there and to understand that these students are like have a lot of needs, but also are so eager to learn as well. And so just to kind of understand how to navigate that and how to help them.
That's great, Samuel. Thank you so much. Molly, just before I switch to the next question, there was a question in the chat about the direct supports that MNPS provides around interpretive and translated materials and resources. What are the ways in which MNPS actually supports all of the different languages spoken in our schools, and how do we actually communicate with families? Can you just give a little bit more sense of that? Because I know it's a pretty amazing feat over there.
And then I think it will probably also later on come up, because I think that we work hard in this area, but I do think there are areas of improvement and that we've learned a lot about, right? So we have around 65, 70 parent outreach translators in our district who are assigned to schools to provide interpretation and translation support. And included in that number are our central office employees. We have 8 people that are kind of behind the scenes who are just constantly translating district-wide documents. And then the school-based personnel are doing the school letters and things like that are more at that school level, but they're also the ones that are often in contact with families and making calls and things like that.
That's great. I'm going to ask the next question to Maria and Samuel. What are some ways you're seeing COVID-19 uniquely affecting EL families, Maria? And then Samuel, I want you to come in and talk a little bit about how COVID is affecting our EL students specifically. Maria, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think that there's some things that EL families have always been worried about that now that school has gone virtual have been exacerbated. So for example, we get a lot of questions from parents about how do I know if my child is on grade level? How do I know if they're advancing? How do I know how they're doing in school? And I think when you can talk to your teacher face to face, you can get the feeling of it is different. And I think now more than ever, our parents are having to log on to new systems, or email, or communication is so much different, that I think families are thinking, how do I know if my child is doing well? And now that learning is at home, I think it also brings up some insecurities about what is my role as a parent? How do I foster their learning? How do I make sure that they are where they're supposed to be academically? And I think our families have a lot of questions about how are they supposed to do that? How do they become facilitators of learning? And I would say that's kind of like the emotional side of it. But then I think COVID there's been inequalities in the school system and in Nashville and in society as a whole, based on income, based on access to healthcare, based on transportation systems, based on food deserts and high quality health and food. And all of these things, I think, are now affecting our families even more. So when you showed the map about the COVID hotspots, and we have more people who are essential workers, who are maybe working in like high touch, high risk jobs, those are the things that our families are thinking about. So now it's not only the learning of my child, but maybe we've had a greater loss of income, or maybe we're putting ourselves more at risk, or maybe we're worried that when our kids or our spouses come home, we have grandparents that are here. So I think the, you know, access to health information in our native language, health, education, income, well-being, mental health resources, all of those are intricately tied together with what it means for a student to feel good and welcome when they're going into a school, and for a family to feel good and confident and prepared when they're part of educating their child. And those are the things that are imploding and exploding in ways that I don't think we were prepared for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Samuel, you want to add about the student experience and what you're seeing?
So, yes. So one of the things that I always get asked, that I'm always constantly being asked by the students is like, Mr. Montoya, when are we going back to school? And I think that the reason why the students are, specifically the students that I work with, are constantly asking me about that is because they've been affected in such a way that it's so difficult for them to connect when they're doing this virtual education, because like the learning process for them, it has become a little bit more difficult. Specifically when you're learning a new language, and I think it's so difficult for some of our students to be able to have that real connection. As we all know, it's like so much better to have these kind of conversations face to face than like on looking at a computer. And so think about those EL students who are not just learning the language, but also learning how to navigate the system for the first time, and learning how to be students in a different environment. And so those are some of the issues, the things that have affected our students the most. Like they crave for that face-to-face interaction. As we all know, like learning a language and learning something different, sometimes it needs to be like like face-to-face, or like, oh, you need to be touching things, or you need to be experiencing those kind of things in a different way. And so this is what has become very difficult for my EL students, for the EL students that we work with, because it creates such a barrier to be able to try to connect to the system, to try to connect to the platform, to try to connect with the teacher, to try to connect with other students, as you know, that friendship. Like I mentioned before, that some of the students have gone through so much stuff already that like what they need is sort of like an environment that where they can feel like they can participate in things. But when right now it just doesn't feel the same way. Right now it just feels like they're cooked up on a house, and not be able to do other things that they're capable to do when they're like doing face-to-face learning.
We'll pick up on that a little bit, and I'm going to ask Molly to weigh in on this as well. You know, the digital divide obviously has exploded into our most immediate attention, given the nature of remote learning, and we know that we have EL families who are working to get online, access to computers, access to internet, et cetera. Can you give us a little bit more sense of what that has been like for our EL families, and anything that we as a community might be able to do to support our EL families and all of our families in mitigating the digital divide? Samuel, let's start with you, and then I'll switch over to Molly.
Yeah, so one of the things that I like, it is so, one of the things that it is so difficult for me to navigate. It's like this whole new thing about being digital for my students. some of my students don't have the experience that other people have, and like, you know, like nowadays you can assume that everybody knows how to use a computer, but you know, I'm dealing with some students that, like, this is for the first time they're getting access to a computer. I'm dealing with students that, like, for the first time they're like turning on a computer, and like, it's just, and so it is so difficult. And you know, and when we're trying to navigate, even to create a communication, when I'm connecting with the students through the platform, it can become such a like big mountain to climb. I think one of the things that we need to give to our students just a little bit of grace, because it is so difficult, so difficult to just kind of learn everything through a device, like, and not necessarily that someone is, like, you know, taking your hand and showing you what you need to do, but it's like you have to, like, the students have to do it on their own. And I had to sit there with my students for 45 minutes to an hour to trying to get them to log in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just been so difficult with going digital, and having to learn everything for myself, but also having to learn everything so I can teach those students and being able to help them as much as I can. So yeah.
Yeah,
it's been difficult.
Yeah, I understand. Molly, you want to add anything from the district's perspective on closing the digital divide for our EL students and families?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Samuel is speaking to is definitely something that we've experienced at a K-12 setting. We quickly realized when we closed in the spring, the digital divide was huge. We can give you a laptop, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's equal access, because you don't know how to utilize the laptop well, you may not know how to utilize the learning platform, and then you have to access the curriculum. And all of that is needed for our English learners. An interpreter is needed for that explanation to happen. So we quickly realized the interpretation services are key. We cannot, this was kind of over the summer months, we said to ourselves, we cannot plan anything when it comes to reopening virtually or reopening in person that doesn't have something about how are we going to utilize interpretation services. Then just kind of what Samuel talked about was, we realized that there's what many of our families who knew technology well, they were able to take some of those learning guides and run with it. Like, if I can read this piece of paper and go with it. But if I've never really utilized a computer, I need someone to help me with that. So we, number one, put up a channel that said, okay, if you need support with your laptop, you can call a number and firsthand get an interpreter. But if that's not enough, we realized very quickly that we needed to open up some in-person help sites. So our amazing student services department took that and ran with it. And we now have these virtual help centers where families can come in and do exactly what Samuel is describing. And we're doing that every single day with families. It's been great to see the progression, though, from we've helped you at the beginning. We were helping people with the laptop issue, like, how do we log on? How do we find this? To, okay, how do I navigate Schoology? And then this last phase has been, okay, I'm in Schoology, but how do I submit an assignment that requires a recording? So we're definitely making that progression, but we have to realize, like Samuel said, we've got to have patience, because not only are the English learners learning this new technology, they're also acquiring this very challenging grade level content. And on top of that, they're learning English at the same time.
Yeah. Well, kudos to all of you for what you're doing, especially in this unbelievably unique circumstance of a global pandemic. I'm going to ask all of you to respond to the next question. We touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the conversation, but let's start with you, Maria. What misconceptions about EL students and their families do you encounter on a regular basis in your work that you'd like to dispel?
Yeah, I think some of the ones were actually addressed in the PowerPoint, thinking that all EL students are Latino students, or all Latino students are EL students. Our diversity across Metro is wide, and our students like Molly said, yes, we have a really high concentration of students in some of those Southeast areas, but also I think people think that only in those schools will they encounter an EL student, so only those areas need that support, when really, because of general changes in the community, cost of living, our families are moving farther and farther out. And so when we think about places like Madison and Goodlettsville, or areas around Charlotte Park West, those are still areas that need that support and where families are beginning to grow. And then the last one for me, which I think is the most important, is that language should never equal someone's assumption of intelligence. We have geniuses across the world who speak different languages. The US is not the only country that is putting out amazing ideas. And I think people often assume that because a student doesn't speak the language, it means that they can't do the work or that they can't understand the content or excel, when we see, like you showed with your valedictorians, salutatorians, but even just with our everyday students, they are just as capable, competent, intelligent, and deserving of all the respect and dignity that all of our students are.
Hear, hear. Beautifully said. Samuel, why don't we go to you? Same question about misconceptions that you face.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to mention was something that Maria Paula just said so beautifully, that I walk in the hallways and I see that there are students that obviously that are just learning the language, and but then sometimes it feels like the teachers kind of look at them and say like, well, like you're not understanding me, and like or something like around that, and it just feels like. It feels like that some of the time, most of the time, it's like, because you don't speak the language, you don't understand what's going on. Like the student can pick up from your body language of what's happening, whether if you're like you saying something like nice or saying something different. That I feel like a lot of the times there are some people that like just misunderstand the fact that just because they don't speak the language doesn't necessarily mean they don't understand what's going on. I encounter so many students every day that their experiences back in their countries have helped them to navigate the system here and navigate and help them to understand a lot of the things that people in the U.S. do. And I think that sometimes we miss that. We miss that the fact that those students have already have so much experiences on the things that they do. And that helps them in every single day life, that when they come here, sometimes we just want them to do this specific thing that we think it works. But like Molly said, like, no, you have to be able to learn how to navigate those things, those experiences they already have, in order for you to help them to grow more. And that's one is the misconception. The language barrier, like, it's not equal to like not having experience. Like their experience helps them to navigate everything that they do here in the U.S.
That's wonderful. Molly, you want to close out the question about misconceptions that you see in your work and every day?
What I was thinking of was that I really hear sometimes people say that EL families,
lean in again for us if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
EL families, I hear sometimes people say that EL families are not engaged. First of all, that breaks my heart, because I would say that.
Say that again, Molly. I missed that.
I would say that I sometimes hear that EL families are not engaged.
Oh.
And that breaks my heart, because I know that's exactly the opposite of the situation. I would even say that we're just not doing a great job engaging them. We're not doing a wonderful job. If that's the case, if a family's not coming, have we thought about their work schedule? Have we thought about what engagement looks like in their country and the conceptions that they have about what this looks like? Have we really reached out and let the family know that, yes, we welcome you, and what does that look like here, and what would you like to offer us? So I would say that being disengaged is a misconception that I would love to shift in our schools, so that we could hear less of that, and that we could have our families really being the ones that are offering the various things.
That could be a lesson beyond just our EL families as well. That's very powerful. So Molly and Maria, just a couple more questions for the group, and then we'll open it up to questions from anyone on the call. The next question is for Molly and Maria. What are the main lessons we're learning during COVID-19 that will help schools and organizations support our English learner families once this pandemic is over? Maria, why don't you start on that one?
Yeah, I think what Molly was saying is something that I've felt deeply for a really long time, which is the way that we build experiences for parents and for students, particularly EL parents and students, is from this lens of availability rather than accessibility. Just because you make something available does not mean that a family can fully utilize it. In the same way that giving a student a laptop and a hotspot doesn't mean that they now have the digital literacy skills to use those tools to the best of, to the best of their abilities. I think we're learning that, and I hope that parents and EL parents specifically have always wanted these really high levels of engagement. They have always wanted to be very well informed about their child's education and well-being and their academic growth, and have always been committed to that. But like Molly said, we haven't really built a system that responds to that. And I think we take the approach that if they don't come, it's because they don't care, when really it's how are we building the system, and realizing that EL students are not one size fits all. What might work for one population of EL students might be very different from what works for another population, whether that's because of differences in language, in culture, in educational experience in their home country, in the trauma that they've experienced. EL students are not all one and the same. And I think the way that we think about what does a prepared student look like actually says a lot more about our own cultural and social capital and what we assume is the standard. So I hope that, a lot of things are happening and will continue to happen over COVID, but I hope that we've realized that we need to put a lot more effort into thinking about how are we communicating with families in ways that are really, really meaningful and that reach them, and how are we serving EL students in ways that are responsive to their individual circumstances. And then also, I think, to me, is reimagining what does digital literacy look like. Digital literacy does not necessarily mean that you're sending emails and like editing YouTube videos. Digital literacy can be like, are you be able to turn on this computer, connect it to your Wi-Fi, log on to a platform, create an email account, know the difference between your username and your password and different platforms. And so we really need to expand what does it look like to provide really profound support to make sure that our students continue to have access in a digital world.
Great points.
On that one, I was thinking when you said that, number one would be when we go back, first and foremost, we got to help close these gaps immediately so that if we do have a closure again, we can help people kind of seamlessly go through that. But when I was thinking about your question, Katie, there are two things that came to mind when you think about systematic and a system in our organization. Really, we learned quickly the importance of translation and interpretation services. I think Samuel said this earlier about how we rely on a lot of that face-to-face encounter when it's in a school setting. So we communicate, even though we shouldn't be doing this, you do communicate a lot solely through the child to go home and make sure your parents or execute this. When that's gone, you're solely relying on all these other communication channels. But when we shift that communication channel and we're not using interpretation services systematically, we leave folks behind and create gaps. And then also thinking through how are you systematically and throughout your organization creating procedures and systems so that all departments, all schools are using those in the same way. And then how are you setting it up so families can have a two-way conversation with you? It's one thing to tell them something, but how can a family respond? And how does a family have a way to access an interpreter to be able to tell you that something is wrong? And I think that systematic consistency, when you think about structure, also goes at a school level. So how can an organization or a school system create, I use the word systems again, but create systems that each school is executing so that if a parent has children in this elementary school, middle school, and high school, they're not trying to figure out the different methods at each of the various schools. And so those are two things I think that when the pandemic is over, organizations can think about in order to best support their English learners.
So there's some things that we can say have come out of the pandemic that we hope will be able to be built on. So that's wonderful. Last question to everyone, and then we have a few questions in the chat that I want to get to. what do we still need to do to improve how we serve our EL students and families? And if you could even give those on the call some specific things that we as community members in our city can do to support our EL students, that would be wonderful. So let's start with Samuel on that one.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we still need to do to support our EL families is to just to make sure that you're engaging in any way that you can with them. It's not us versus them. It's all us in the same, in the same thing, being all together. I feel like that when you make a differences, then there's a separation. I feel like in order for you to like support them, you need to come to know them, know who they are, and know what they're all about. And also the same thing, those families and students will do the same. I feel like open communication, open dialogue, easy communication, where they have access to all that information that is needed. That if we have some easy access to that, man, it will be just so great, because the families will be informed, the students will be informed, and yeah, that communication, that dialogue, open dialogue with the EL families and students, I think is still something that we can strengthen in our community.
Great. Maria Paula, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I think there's some things that need to happen systematically to improve it. And I love, Molly, you were saying systems, and I think systems is so key, because if we do one thing perfectly and then 3 other people are not, it's just not as effective as it's supposed to be. I think one of them is expanding what we see as appropriate methods of communications with our family. I think we rely really heavily on email and on text, like actual written text, when there's so many other methods that our families are using to communicate. Texting is very effective when it comes to our EL families. Individual phone calls, as time consuming as they are 10 times more effective with our families. Video message, where they don't have to read something, because sometimes you can translate a document and it doesn't mean that the concept will carry over if the academic level of that document is still really high. So thinking about our families are using WhatsApp, or our families are using video messaging, or our families are logging into Nashville Noticias like news network. What are ways that our EL families are actually connecting to news, and how can we expand those and make them more, acceptable, appropriate across the board to be used? I would also say systematically, we need to think about, in the long term, hiring more bilingual, bicultural staff.
Yeah.
Bilingual, bicultural staff make a massive difference in the way that students feel welcomed, feel seen, and I think also creates models for what is their own success going to look like and what can they aspire to. And so thinking about teacher recruitment and what does that look like, but just staff across the board, how do we make sure that our schools are actually reflective of the great diversity in our student population? More EL staff members, more people from Mali to lead the way. I mean, we need so many more translators, so many more school staff. All of that leads to funding, all of that leads to voting, all of that leads to civic engagement as a whole. And then my last one, I think, is more opportunities for training. So if teachers and admins and principals want to learn more about EL populations, about immigrant populations, about refugee students, we are available to do things like that. There's plenty of organizations that can do that work and that can do it really well. But that's just not, and there's so much training going on out there, and I understand that, but I think we need to be able to have those opportunities so teachers and staff feel comfortable when they're working with our kids.
That's great. Thank you. And Molly, you can close us out on this last question. What do we still need to do, and what can we as individuals do as well?
All right. Well, I'm going to tell you what you can, as individuals, our virtual learning help centers, virtual learning help centers are open through October 2nd. And so sign up to go out and support those sites. It's an amazing experience because you get to connect with the families, and you also get a firsthand experience seeing what the students are going through every day, how hard they're working, but also ways that we as a community can better support our families. How can we improve and overall in our approach? I second the need for more translation and interpretation services. We just don't have enough. I really feel like if you are going to be, and this is obviously a nationwide issue, but if you truly want things to be equal for your English learners, they need to be receiving every single thing that an English speaker would receive in their first language. And until MNPS can do that, I mean, we still are working behind on that. I do know that our district is trying really hard, but there's always the opportunity for more. Yeah. And then one thing I think that kind of goes back to what Maria Paula said, the cultural understandings. Last year, we had the opportunity to really pour into some of the expertise that they had and had them come out in front of principals and things like that. But every single one of us could constantly be learning more about our families in order to better connect with them. And always, number 3, don't forget, you just bring along some neighbors. My family thinks I'm crazy, but when we're at a restaurant and I see children, I say, hey, how's your virtual learning going? And when they say that I don't know anything about it, I say, hey, I need to connect you with this person. So we're a community. Make sure all of our community members are engaged in virtual learning and know about what's going on. And I think that's just really important that we could help just the person across the street.
Well, all 3 of you gave some very concrete things that we can do as a community to better support our EL families, and I really appreciate that. We do have a couple of questions that I want to ask, and I'm just going to say anybody who wants to jump in can respond. One is, and this might be actually, Maria, a good question for you to start with. How are we supporting families filling out the census? This is such a crucial key piece of how we get our resources from the federal government. And so what are you all doing at Conexion? And Molly, if you have anything to add from the MNPS perspective, please do.
Yes, I think this is so important, because I think our families have a lot of misconceptions or fear around the census and what does it mean and what is it really doing and where's my information going. I think the first piece is making sure that our families have a really good understanding of what the census is and what's at stake. It's a safe process, it's a confidential process, it's for everyone regardless of their immigration status. And so we've been doing a lot of information from like videos, Facebook posts, texting. It goes out to all of our individual program participants, just information about what it is and how do you fill it out. And then if you were to go on the Conexión América's Facebook page, you would see that almost every day for the past forever days, we've been posting about the census, when to complete it. People can call our helpline if they need help to complete the census. And then we're also doing I'm not sure if it's weekly or daily raffle, where if a family sends in their little confirmation of like, hey, you've done the census, they enter a raffle into a grocery gift card. So we have been putting out as much information as possible for making sure that our families understand the census, understand what's at stake and why their voice is so important. And that if they need help filling it out, if they need to talk to someone, if they need to understand, they can call Conexión Américas to do that. They can enter a raffle and have some fun along the way. And then we also use opportunities like this. So anytime I'm in front of any camera of any sort, I will tell people about the census and that they can call us, text us, beep us, smoke signal us, whatever they need to make sure that we get that census done.
That's great. Molly, anything from the MNPS perspective? I know it's obviously not the objective of the district to get responses to the census, but have you seen anything there?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's our objective, but I've definitely seen it. It's and also we have an opportunity coming up, the TEDx Nashville, where students can get up and speak about those things. So I think that's one opportunity for students to even speak about the census.
Right.
So we have actually had the census at our virtual help centers. And we've been, after families come through and talk to us, we've been directing them over there. But it's also been publicized multiple ways through our media channels as well.
That's great. By the way, before I forget, Molly, if somebody does want to volunteer at one of the virtual help centers, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, they can email me directly because I can give you the link in the chat. Would they be able to see that to sign up?
I'm not sure if the chat is viewable to everybody. Can you put it in the Q&A? Just add it as a Q&A.
If it doesn't work in the Q&A, I will, you can always email directly and I will connect you with the sign-up sheet. Dr. Springer's department is amazing and they're pulling this off, but I know that we need as many volunteers as possible. It's the best thing you'll ever do, I promise, if anybody wants to sign up.
Well, good. And anybody can reach out, of course, to the foundation as well, and we will make sure that people get connected to the volunteering opportunities. Our last question is from Jeannie, who asked, what advice would you give to the school board to make sure that the needs and aspirations of our EL students are heard at the board level? Anyone want to just jump in on that one? Maybe I'll let Samuel take the first go.
I feel like you know, one of the advice that I will give to the school board is to be able to always be open to listen to what the EL students have to say. You know, because I'm saying we, but like the EL students is such a big population, and so it's like a major component and the district. So I think one of the things that it needs to happen is for all the board, everybody across the board. It doesn't necessarily mean that like has to be a school board. Everybody, you know, to be open for a conversation, to listen to what the needs, like especially the academic needs of our students. You know, we have, like Maria Paula said, we have so many students that are so talented and so passionate. And you know, it's all about like giving them a platform. I feel like that's one of the major things that needs to happen. And, you know, that like, and that will be my advice, to be able to give like platform where the students can shine, and to listen to like the needs and those dreams that those EL students have in our district.
Molly or Maria Paula?
I can go. So what I was going to say is that regardless of the district that you represent, any school board member who is committed to the well-being of students and who cares about equity needs to be thinking about EL students. Even if your district does not have a very high percentage of EL students, their success, their well-being is about the well-being of all MNPS students. It's about the future contributions that they're going to make to Metro Nashville Public Schools and then Davidson County as a whole. And so I think one of them is realizing that EL students doing well and succeeding and feeling welcomed is about equity. And that needs to be embedded into our systems all the way from a teacher to a school board member. So if you're equity focused, you need to be asking questions and learning more about our EL population and students. And if you feel like it's a topic that you might not know a whole lot about, reach out. Reach out to Molly, reach out to me, reach out to someone. Reach out to organizations that have been doing the work for a really long time, reach out to experts, reach out to colleagues. And then I think, like someone said, any opportunity to be listening directly from students and from parents, I think is really important, and making sure that the ways that the school board meets, whether it's translation or how parents are invited in, are also accessible to our EL families, because I think that's a piece where I don't think I've had many EL parents tell me, oh yeah, I know a lot about the school board and what it does and its role, and I've been to a meeting or logged in or heard. So how are meetings being accessible to our EL families, I think, is something to think about as well.
That's great. Molly, you want to close us out?
I think it's important to, if this is important to you, to bring along other stakeholders so that their voices are also heard. I think it's important to hear from people in other departments, from people in schools that don't have English learners, so that the school boards know that it's not just a priority for EL advocates, but it's a priority for all of us. And that will help us really make movement in this area.
That's great. Well, I cannot thank you all enough for such a wonderful conversation, such great insights, of course, and then also just really good, tangible things that I feel like we as community members can do to support our EL families in Nashville. So thank you so much for your time. Obviously, we have heard this is a an equity conversation front and center, and we have to be, as a community, here to support all of our families, not just those who live right around us or right with us or look like us or anything like that. So just really, really appreciate your time. And to those of us who joined us, both on Facebook Live and here on Zoom, thank you so much. We will be continuing the conversation. I also want to give one quick plug for an event that's coming up at Turk. They are hosting the event called Everyone Has the Power to Shape the Election. That is on tomorrow night at 7 p.m. If you'd like more information about that, you can go to Turk's website, that's TIRRC, and learn more about their work and their wonderful work with our immigrant and refugee families. Thanks again to everyone. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to future conversations. Bye-bye.